Many who have contributed to give currency to this scheme have been actuated, I have no doubt, by motives which are in themselves highly commendable. They wished to fix the attention of men on matters confessedly of great importance, and were anxious to put an end to the dissensions of Christians by discovering a mean point in which the views of all might harmoniously meet. But surely those who cherish a supreme regard for divine authority will be afraid of condemning or of teaching others to think lightly of anything which bears its sacred impress. They will be disposed carefully to reconsider an opinion or an interpretation of any part of Scripture which seems to imply in it that God has given to men, a power to dispense with some of his own laws. And they will be cautious of originating or countenancing plans of communion that may involve a principle of such a complexion. These plans are more or less dangerous according to the extent to which they are carried, and the errors or abuses which may prevail among the parties which they embrace. But however limited they may be, they set an example which may be carried to any extent, so far as it is agreed and stipulated that any truth or duty shall be sacrificed or neglected, and that any error or sin shall be treated as indifferent or trivial. The essence of latitudinarianism is adopted, room is made for further advancements, and the way is prepared for ascending, through successive gradations, to the very highest degree in the scale. Another plan of communion, apparently opposite to the former, but proceeding on the same general principle, has been zealously recommended, and in some instances reduced to practice in the present day. According to it, the several religious parties are allowed to remain separate, and to preserve their distinct constitution and peculiarities, while a species of partial or occasional communion is established among them. This plan is liable to all the objections which lie against the former, with the addition of another that is peculiar to itself. It is inconsistent and self-contradictory. It strikes against the radical principles of the unity of the Church, and confirms schism by a law. While it provides that the parties shall remain separate, at the same time that it proceeds on the supposition that there is no scriptural or conscientious ground of difference between them. By defending such occasional conformity, English dissenters at a former period contradicted the reasons of their dissent from the establishment and exposed themselves to their opponents. For where communion is lawful, it will not be easy to vindicate separation from the charge of schism. The world has for some time beheld annually the spectacle of Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Independents, Methodists, and Seceders sitting down together at the Lord's table, and then going away and maintaining communion through the remainder of the year on their own separate and contradictory professions. Nay, it has of late become the practice to keep in the same church an open communion table for Christians of different denominations on one part of the day, and a closed one for those of a particular sect on the other part of the day, while the same minister officiates and many individuals communicate on both these occasions. And all this is cried up as a proof of liberality, and a mind that has freed itself from the trammels of party. And here a footnote. In America, a plan of brotherly correspondence has recently been agreed to between the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church and the General Synod of the Associate Reformed Church. The first article of agreement is the churches are to remain entirely separate and independent. But the remaining articles, it is provided that members of either church may be admitted to communion with the other, and that the officers in any congregation of either church may invite to their pulpit any minister or probationer in the other, quote, who preaches in their purity the great doctrines of the gospel as they are stated in the common confession of faith and have generally been received and taught in the Reformed churches, unquote. Those who censure in the one church are not to be received into the other. Those under censure in the one church are not to be received into the other. The members of presbyteries and synods of one of the churches may be invited to sit as corresponding members of the same judicatories of the other. But if not invited, they must not be offended. And a minister or elder from each of the supreme judicatories shall sit in the other without a vote. Though I consider this plan as obnoxious to the censures in the text, I would not be understood as condemning all intercourse or correspondence between separate churches. On the contrary, I think that in some instances it may be of great utility for paving the way for the removing of subsisting differences, and preventing or remedying offenses, hurtful to the general interests of religion, which may arise from the managements of either party, such as the receiving into communion those who have fled from discipline in the other. It is difficult to say which of these plans is most objectionable. By the former, that church which is most faithful and has made the greatest progress in reformation must always be the loser, without having the satisfaction to think that she has conveyed any benefit to her new associates. It behooves her profession and managements to yield and be reduced to the standard of those societies which are defective and less reformed. And thus, by a process opposite to that mentioned by the Apostle, those who have built on the foundation, gold, silver, precious stones, are the persons who shall suffer loss. By the latter, all the good effects which might be expected from warrantable and necessary separations are lost, without the compensation of a rational and effective conjunction. Purity of communion is endangered. Persons are encouraged to continue in connection with the most corrupt churches, and a faithful testimony against errors and abuses, with all consistent attempts to have them removed or prevented, is held up to odium and reproach as dictated by bigotry, and as tending to revive old dissensions, and to defeat the delightful prospect of those halcyon days of peace which are anticipated under the reign of mutual forbearance and charity. Number 5. We may learn from this subject what is the temper of mind which becomes Christians in a time of abounding divisions in the church, and what are the qualities required in those who attempt to heal them. All have it in their power to contribute in some degree to the promoting of this work, and therefore ought to cherish the dispositions which correspond to it. Although this is in a more eminent manner the duty of such as possess superior influence, or who from their station may be called to take a leading part in the negotiations, and here I do not hesitate to name, as the primary qualification, an inviolable love to truth and supreme regard to divine authority, that person is totally disqualified for being a negotiator, or for acting the most subordinate part in such a sacred treaty, whose pulse does not beat high with this honorable and divine feeling. He will betray those interests which are in themselves the highest, and ought to be the dearest to all parties, whenever they are found irreconcilable with the attainment of an inferior object which he is determined to gain. When genuine and pure and enlightened, the feeling which we are recommending, so far from obstructing as is often mistakenly imagined, will greatly facilitate and forward any negotiation to which a good man would wish success. The next place is due to a pacific disposition. He who has said, "Love the truth and peace," intended to teach us what we are sometimes disposed to disbelieve, that a regard to the former is not incompatible with a regard to the latter. In settling religious differences, the nice and difficult task is to find out a way by which to adjust the claims of the two, to seek peace and ensue it, without erring from the truth. And who so fit for this as the peaceable and faithful in Israel, who are endowed with the wisdom that is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated. 2 Samuel 20, verse 19, and James 3, verse 17.